Tēnā koutou katoa, ka mihi mahana, kia koutou. Very warm greetings from down here in the south. Just checking that this sound is working, so I've had a few technical hitches today, but if you can hear me, fantastic. I'm a professor of political science and I specialise in democracy and also in climate change and environment. The reason I'm presenting on this issue is that one of the areas that I've researched, and I've taught New Zealand politics for over 30 years at Lincoln and Canterbury. I've had fellowships at Oxford and the University of Surrey and the University of East Anglia. But one of my key interests is how can we maintain democracy through big upheavals, whether those upheavals are climate change, economic earthquakes, or in this case, the breakdown of social cohesion. And that's what I want to speak to in this. So I just want to touch on 4 points that I make in the proposal and then just leave it for questions. I'm opposed to the treaty bill in its entirety and to the referenda, but I'm particularly concerned about the framing of this whole debate and the way, for example, in which expertise is positioned as politicised. I'm speaking as a defender of democracy here, not because of any political perspectives of my own. I am concerned that this bill, and I was extremely surprised actually that our national party, as the major coalition party, enabled it, because it's led a small and extreme libertarian view within a party, set policy direction that's now well outside of the position of median New Zealand voters. Back in 2012, Emeritus Professor Jack Nagle said there is one huge risk with MMP, but it would never happen, or very rarely, he imagined, where a small party could exploit a favourable bargaining position to impose an undiluted view of their preferred policy, therefore causing great distress amongst the majority. And if that happened, that power is dangerous to the polity, and it's difficult to defend from a democratic viewpoint. He said, however, it would hardly ever happen because it would be very unusual, and it had been very unusual that governments under MMP had ever enabled a small party to extract such a high price for a block of votes. But I would say that's exactly what happened now. Yeah. And I want to talk about why this is so dangerous for our democracy and what actually is happening in a wider political sense. I know that a number of the ACT party members will take umbrage at being described as extreme libertarian at the moment. But to be absolutely clear, what this party has done in positioning this bill is to frame it within an international debate that is very strong in the United States, where small parties have tried to paint equality of votes as a very narrow interpretation, where it simply means equality for all individuals, as if we had no history, as if we had no connection. The leader of the ACT party, David Seymour, asks, where in the world has it worked to divide people up by their ancestry? Now, I would argue that that's extremely disingenuous because, for a start, the treaty hasn't done that. The treaty is a treaty between the Crown and Māori authority. It's a treaty about power and how we live together. But in reality, very many modern democracies, Canada, Denmark, Bolivia, Sweden, Finland, Ecuador, the Philippines, are all enabling constitutional recognition of Indigenous people. The reason that I also argue that this is an extreme position is that the majority of New Zealanders, their core value is fairness, which is something that John Key really well understood. And for the reasons of fairness, the idea that we would have a referendum to determine the future of our treaty is fundamentally unfair. And all of our research is showing that New Zealanders do recognise fairness. They recognise the situation where we have inherited an unequal situation. A referenda, as the previous submitter said, is a very blunt tool, and it's very rarely used by governments to determine constitutional rights for small minorities. And I would strongly recommend we don't go that route. I would recommend we think about other routes. We've seen what happened in Australia, but we've also seen positive outcomes in Ireland, where they've used other forms of constitutional assemblies and discussion, like we've already seen with Matua Jackson around the country, where we begin a different way of talking about constitutions. So I'll stop there and answer questions. Thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Bronwyn. You're part one of the tag team of Haywards this afternoon or this morning, so looking forward to part two. Thank you for your submission. We've got some questions from Ginny Anderson and then Duncan Webb.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. I've always been interested in your work. I'd like to thank you for sort of framing this debate up in a global context, and I'd like to endeavour to ask you what your analysis of what is the motive, what's the underlying motive for doing this from David Seymour, given what you've said in terms of playing out in other countries in the global context. What do you think it is that he's trying to achieve by going through this?
I don't want to personalise it to David Seymour, and I can't speak for what his motive is, but I can speak for what a small, smart party might try and do, is that they're trying to frame their core values as being part of something that's fundamental to a constitution. So they've framed the narrative. The National Party has lost control of this narrative and is risking losing control of the governance of the country. We have seen polls showing increased social discontent. It is doing harm. But by trying to position equal opportunities in a very narrow way as a definition of the treaty, our constitutional document, a small party is trying to create and broaden its position. It's really trying to make itself much bigger and align itself to something that's strongly important to the nation. At the same time, it is exploiting basic wedge politics to do this. It grows the sense of dissatisfaction and anger, and that becomes incredibly hard to manage politically, and it's extremely divisive for the country.
Thank you.
Duncan and then Tim.
Kia ora. Thanks for that submission, Bronwyn, really useful. Interested in some of your statements around democracy, you used the terms a democratic viewpoint. One of the threads here is that if you've got a properly elected government, they can take any step that they want to because they've been democratically elected, and that gives them the authority to do so. I'm interested in your comments kind of on that, and does a responsible democratic government mean more than simply that kind of democracy?
Yes, I mean, it's very easy to think a democracy means one person, one vote, but actually we have thousands of democracies around the world. In politics, as political science, we say that democracy means a set of principles. It means that you are an accountable government, you are inclusive, and you are transparent. And you are therefore recognising the rights of your people, and your people are diverse, so that you come to unique ways in which you ensure that your community feels like they're being heard, they have a place, they have a voice and a right to be here. But also, your government has to have legitimacy. And the opening speakers were talking about the treaty as being one of the key things that gives Parliament its legitimacy.
Thank you, Bronwyn. We'll final question from Tim.
Kia ora, Professor. I just wanted to ask you, could you, in your oral submission just now, you talked about a number of countries who have special rights arrangements within their democracies, and you named some. Could you just speak to some of what those look like, give a few examples, and how they're kind of based in what they look like in other countries, and how they're completely normal?
My wonderful colleague, Dr. Lindsay MacDonald here, has done a whole study on these, but they are completely normal in that all democracies seek to protect the rights of groups and as well as individuals. We aren't just a society of individuals. We have our histories, we have our traditions, we have our religions. Freedom actually means protecting all of those practices, traditions, and cultures. So every society develops particular unique ways, and we have a very distinctive and important way of doing this. And it has a long and constitutional basis, which we should be very proud of as a nation. And we have a tribunal and courts in which we can actually attend to our differences. And that matters hugely for social cohesion and for the health of our democracy. So I really implore this committee to be extremely strong in resisting a referenda. It would be a terrible next step.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you for your time with the committee. We appreciate you spending with us this morning.
Fun.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. So I really enjoyed that submission.
Yes.
You know, she's Professor of Political Science, taught at both Lincoln and Canterbury. And she asked some really good questions. How do we preserve democracy? And is the ACT Party's position on this? Is this a libertarian view on te tiriti? I'm a libertarian myself, and I disagree that what ACT is doing is a libertarian position on te tiriti. Because the libertarian position would be to decentralize power and to share power amongst the different, to share power between Māori and Pākehā, to have a partnership. Yeah. That would be the libertarian position, because that's how we achieve the small government ideas within libertarianism. It's not about just cutting back central government, and for the sake of cutting back central government. It's about returning that power back to the people, so they have better representation within a democratic society. So again, this goes back to the idea of direct democracy as well, which is a libertarian value. She also brings up a really good opinion about MMP. MMP, as I've noticed, it's flawed when weak leadership is at the helm. And she brings up a really question, or at least, in my opinion, it's making me ask the question, do we need new limitations on what can be negotiated on when a coalition is formed?
That's a really good point, because, things like things to do with race and things to do with founding documents shouldn't be arguable. I can't think of any other word right now, but principles, but I really don't want to use that. When it comes to forming a coalition or even a trade and supply agreement.
Yep.
So that you can form a government and be in power. And yeah, you're right. I can't remember who it was. I'm sorry, but someone towards the start of the stream today was saying, aren't ACT supposed to be a libertarian party? They're acting very unlibertarian-like.
They're acting authoritarian.
That's paraphrasing what they said. But yeah.
What did KC stand for again? Was it
King's Council?
Council.
Yes.
See, what I was rambling about yesterday is at this point, do away with the central government, because you'll have your tribunals and councils and etc. to deal with issues people by people basis when they raise them. It's just a lofty idea, but like if it's going to wobble this hard and well, we've realized our worst case scenario in effect. I mean,
okay, bye. Yeah, but like the problem with ridding any country of its central government is that it gets rid of those national laws, those national protocols, and those national definitions of what you are and are not allowed to do, and which is really, really dangerous for people living on a singular landmass.
Yes, and again, this is I've always believed that central government, there should be limitations to what they're allowed to cut back on, and I think human rights, cutting back on things like human rights and constitutions, that form the country, are things that should be no-go zones.
Exactly.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram.